Steve Cassidy here. So this is part 2 of the video about cookies and databases and sessions. And at this point of the video we have a database application that's ready for us to add cookies and session keys to. So this video goes over the main part of this problem, which is to create a sessions table, to store sessions in our database, and then to create sessions, create cookies, and use those cookies within the application. So here's part 2. So my name is Steve and I like cheese. Okay, that's added, but now it's asking me for my name again, and I like eggs. So I can go through, but what I want to enable now is that instead of asking for my name every time, it saves my name in a cookie. So how do we save our name in a cookie? Let's see. Stop. What we need is more in our database. In our database, we're going to need, as well as this table, we're going to need another table to remember who it is that I am. So let's create a new table. Okay, so we have a new table now, which is the sessions table. The sessions table contains a name and a session ID. Now this is a very common structure for a sessions table. We might also, in many cases, have a piece of data that we want to remember about this person as well. At the moment, the only thing I'm going to remember about this person is their name. So we have a name and a session ID, and now we're going to have to, so we now have a new table. We need to have new functions to manipulate that. So I've got stubs for these here. I want to, just like I've got add, like, and get likes, I'm going to have add session and get user here. I've called it get user because this is like a username. So the add session entry is going to add an entry to the sessions table given a user, this is a name, and generate, so let's call that a name actually. I'm just being inconsistent with my naming conventions. Okay, so say add session for a name, and we generate a session identifier, add it to the database, and return that session identifier. So what are we doing here? What we have is we're going to be given, when we get our form, we're going to be given a name. And what we want to do is to return a cookie to the browser that is going to allow us to remember who that person is next time. Now I could return a cookie that just contains their name. So it says, if I say I'm Steve, I could return a cookie saying your name is Steve, and then every time I get that cookie I will know that it's Steve. But that is insecure, because if somebody wanted to pretend to be me, they would only need to create a cookie themselves, and if you can write code you can do this, that says my name is Steve, and then they can then be Steve. So what we want to do is we return something that is essentially just a random identifier, and then we store that random identifier in our database in this sessions table, alongside the bit of data that we actually want to keep. So we want to keep this person's name, and so it's that random identifier that we send back in the cookie that will be the thing that identifies this person. So our add session routine has got to first of all generate a random identifier. I'm going to say session ID equals, and I can just sort of say, this is a random identifier, but obviously it's got to be a different one depending, every time. So we could try and write code to make up a random string, or we could just use built-in Python libraries. And there is a built-in library called the UUID library, which gives us universally unique identifiers. That's the UUID library. We can have a look at that. Have a look at the Python UUID library and look at Python 3. So That's what this gives us. And immutable UUID objects, so the UUID class, the UUID 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the one that we're going to use, just because it generates a random UUID. And what we actually need then is so that's an object, and so we need a string representation, and so we're going to use this thing here, the hex value of that string. So do that. That gives me a UUID. Let's have a look at how that works. Start up a Python interpreter, and I can import the UUID package. And then if I say UUID 4, then this thing ID is a UUID object. It's a Python object. And I can say id.hex, and that gives me back this random string. So if I do that, that gives me a different one each time. Oh, I entered the debugger accidentally there. Okay, so if I do that, if I just take away the assignment, then each time I run that, I'm going to get a different identifier, and it's a string. That's exactly what I want. So this session ID now is a random string that I can use to store against this person. So now what I want to do is, I've got the name and I've got the session ID. I just need to store that in the database. I'm given my database connection. And so I need some SQL to execute. Insert into sessions value, and I'm going to insert, what did I call them? Call them name and session ID. Values and my 2 question marks. And then I'm going to say cursor.execute SQL, and then the 2 things I'm going to pass in, the name and the session ID. And now, since I've made a change to the database, I need to commit it. And now I said what I would do is return the session ID. Okay, so we've created a random identifier. We've added it into the database here. Committed our change, and we're returning that value there. I'll tell you why we're returning that in a second. Now the second is to query that database. Now the query that I want to do is, when I receive a cookie from a request, I want to know whose cookie is it, who does it respond to. So I pass in the session ID to this procedure, and it's going to return the name of the user that it corresponds to, or if we can't find it, it'll return none. So I want some SQL again. I'm going to do a query. I'm going to select name from sessions, where session ID equals whatever it is. The thing I want to do is the session ID. Okay, so now we should have a result. So the result that we're going to get, so equals cursor. Now we expect only one response from this. We should get only one name per unique session ID. Session IDs are going to be unique because we're generating a new one each time. So it should always be the case that I get one response. So I'm going to ignore any others and just get the first response. And this result is going to be none if there is no session, or it's going to be a list, or in fact a tuple that's going to contain one result if there is a result. So if result, that means means if it's not none, I'm going to return the 0th element of it, else I'm going to return none. So that's my contract here, is I'm going to return none if we can't find the user. So if this query returned nothing, then I will return none. So I've got now 2 database access routines now. So let's go and apply those into our application here. So the first one I'm going to do is here. When I get my name and my thing, okay, for my name here, I'm going to say, let's create a session for that person. Oh, we need to import our routine here. Add session, get name, okay, add session for the database and the name. So there we're going to, when we get a name in, we're going to add the session. And now we've got a session, we want to create a cookie. And we need the response object so that we can add a cookie. A set cookie. And the name, I'm going to call mine session, and the value is the session ID. Okay, so when we get our name in the form, we're immediately going to add a session for that name and set the response with a cookie, and then we're going to go and get we'll do what we did before, we get the thing, and then we're going to add the like for that name and that thing. Okay, so this should create a cookie in the response, and we should get the cookie back. So let's see if this works. Okay, we've written a whole bunch of code. We need to test it. We need to try it out and see what happens. Now, what I can do is I could be writing formal tests, and normally I would encourage you to do that, but just writing it during this video, I want to try and squeeze it into a smaller amount of time. So let's see how we go. Now, did we run our database? I can't remember, so let's try it out. My name is Steve, and I like cheese. Let's see what happens. And we get an error. Now, here's a debugging tip. We've got an error, and we're running the debug option in our main. So we've got debug is true. So I can see the error message here. If I go back to the Python PyCharm window, I can also see the error message here. And the nice thing about this is that all of the things are highlighted as links. And what I want to find is the place in my code where it crashed, because you can see here are cases where in bottle it's crashed, but I can't do anything about that. I'm not going to fix those, but I can try and fix this, and it's saying here handle like, and it's also in database. So let's try in database, and it's saying something's wrong with that there. I'm using UUID. It's got a red line under it. That means I've not imported it. Okay, let's try running that again. So I'll go back. We've got these requests here, and it worked. We like cheese. But what we should have that should be different now is there should be a cookie involved. So there's a request for a like. There is our response, and you can see now there is now a set cookie header. All right. So we've got the set cookie header that has come back from our request. That's because we created that cookie, and there we've hopefully added that. The code says that we should have added that to our sessions table as well. See what this cookie is. This is OAF, and it ends in 321. If I say my name is Jerry and I like milk, I sent another request, and you can see we've got a different session identifier. That's because so far we're not remembering who anybody is. So every request comes in, all we're doing with it is creating that cookie. So we're doing is saying always create a cookie and add it to the table. So every time we get something in, we're just going to add it to the table and ignore it. We're not doing anything with that cookie yet. But now that we have this, then our next request for the home page, the request here, if we look at the request headers, the request header has a cookie in it. Here you go, cookie. At the bottom, the cookie, we're sending back that cookie, the latest version of it.